This episode is brought to you by Fuli Gemstones.
Because the tiara is comparatively light and the honeysuckle motifs are like little fans and they sit proud at the head and the back's open, it's a very wearable piece.
Whereas the palm and lotus is very heavy.
It's a stonker, yeah. I always mean to weigh it, and I never get round to it.
Welcome to If Jewels Could Talk. I'm Carol Woolton, the voice of jewellery, an author, broadcaster, and the woman who initiated the role of jewellery editor at magazines like Tatler and British Vogue. This is a podcast for everyone, for people who do like jewellery, for people who don't realise they like jewellery, and anyone intrigued by fascinating facts, new ideas, and forgotten histories. So please join me as I tell sparkly tales, meeting all sorts of people, delving into 4 centuries of jewellery culture, and investigate what's happening now. Sash, first of all, if you could tell us a little bit about your role at Chatsworth as a curator and what that involves, since it's been a family home since the 16th century.
It has. So I'm the curator of decorative arts, and what that means at Chatsworth is that I look after the furniture, the ceramics, the glass, the clocks, the metals, the ephemera, but more excitingly for me, the jewels and the gems.
So how many things would that involve? Like thousands?
Yes, conservatively thousands. If you were to count every plate, every cup, every chair, I mean, you're in the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds, really, if you were going to really count everything. So it's a lot. One of the things that I probably preoccupy myself with too much are things that we don't have any longer, and tracking little mysteries, which we'll probably touch on later in our conversation.
What things that have been owned by the family that you would like to have back in the collection?
I just like to know where they are sometimes. There's lots of different reasons why things leave collections, but because we have such amazing archives and letters, it's really easy to fall down rabbit holes and just chase these amazing stories, because as you said, we have nearly 500 years of jewellery particularly, but things and occupation to think about.
Did the family start collecting jewellery from the very beginning?
Jewellery was such a status symbol. It was something that they would have needed to have, and that's almost part of the reason why we don't have certainly very early things anymore, because when those things were out of fashion, it was as bad as not having them at all. So what happens is things are refashioned, repurposed, they might leave the family, they might be willed out. But we can look at portraits and letters and certainly begin to get a sense of the things that they used to have and wear to reflect their status and their changing status.
So have you got any of the very early jewels that would have been owned and worn? It was Bess of Hardwick, wasn't it, originally, who built the house?
That's right. So she and her husband William come to Chatsworth in around 1549, and she'd been born in Derbyshire, and they decided to consolidate their estates and move. And he was an actuary in the administration of Henry VIII's court and an administrator of his wealth. And as a married woman living in London, living at court, she would have had show pieces of jewellery. But we don't have any of those any longer. We know that she gifted her ropes of pearls out of the family to a daughter-in-law, and then they went out of the line. So one of those things that we really associate with her, certainly from her portraits, we don't have any longer. The earliest thing we've got is a signet ring that belonged to the Boyle family, who actually married into the Cavendish family in the 1700s. So it's a male signet ring with a foiled back, but not sadly belonging to Bess. And I think that's one of those things that when people come to us, they expect that we would have something belonging to Bess, but we don't have anything that we certainly for certain know belong to her.
That's the problem with jewellery, as you say. It's either sold or it's melted down, and fashion has a big role to play here because people are trying to keep up with changing fashions. The thing that often goes is the jewellery, isn't it?
That's right.
So the gold safe. You have taken me down there, which is the most incredible room. I mean, a vast room that just has this sort of golden light that's reflected from chalices, gold cups, candelabra. I mean, it is quite extraordinary what's in there. Incredible jewelled treasures, not necessarily to wear, but jewelled treasures.
It is an unforgettable room. One of the large pieces that I think you probably remember are a suite of silver gilt dessert dishes, and they came into the family as a perquisite, because the 4th Duke of Devonshire performed the role of Lord Chamberlain, which meant that when a monarch died, he was able to choose different things from the monarch's personal apartments as a perk of the role. So we have coronation thrones, a state bed, and this amazing suite of shaped silver gilt dishes by William Cripps. So that's another way that things come into the family because of their positions at court.
So that's amazing. So our colloquial expression, perk of the job, it comes from that time.
It does, perquisite.
And they could just, strip the royal chamber bare, could they? And take what they felt like?
In theory they could, so different roles could choose different things. And sometimes monarchs were quite naughty. They would promise things to different people. Or, particularly in the time of Queen Anne, different courtiers would each claim the same thing. And so this led to some quite unseemly fallings out over property. But lots of houses, like Knoll has got lots of beds that were claimed as perks, and other places, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why these things, which otherwise would have just been discarded when they became unfashionable, have managed to survive in these lesser homes because they were regarded as such amazing treasures. And they also had that cachet of the provenance, so that added not just the richness of the materials, but the fact that they had belonged in the royal homes and had been slept in by the royal family or used by them at times. Sometimes you have to take a step back when you're looking at a collection and think, is this actually representative of what was here before? Because plates, particularly dining plates, could be used as currency, ready cash. So what you might do in times of trouble is you might keep back your most prestigious things, because actually all the workmanship doesn't equate to cash value at the melt. So what you might do is take your much simpler dining plates and pieces, take those to the melt or have those adapted because you've got that volume of precious material. So sometimes it might be really easy to think that absolutely everything in the past was fabulously decorative. And actually there were lots of more functional things that were made of precious metals. Silver was considered an antibacterial, like quite a healthy thing to eat from. So lots of people would have eaten from silver and using silver utensils. So there was probably a lot more silver around than we really realise now.
So do you think some of these marriages, you're talking about jewellery coming into the family via marriage and gifts, do you think some of these marriages were quite advantageous to bring specific things into the family?
Absolutely. I think marriage is a key reason why things come into the family, either as gifts, to reflect a woman's changing status on marriage. We have a necklace in the family, it's called the Duchess necklace, and our Duchess wears it a lot. It's a cabochon rubellite surrounded by diamonds, from which are suspended different types of ropes of pearls. There's different lengths, different numbers, and it had always been known as the Duchess necklace, and we've got photographs going back to the early 1900s of a Duchess wearing it, but we didn't know the provenance of it until a few years ago. One of our volunteers, Kerry, found a letter from 1830 which describes how the necklace came to be, and it was commissioned by the 6th Duke of Devonshire for his niece Blanche, who married the future 7th Duke of Devonshire, and the 6th Duke gave her this amazing necklace as a wedding present, and it's been passed down through all the Duchesses ever since. So it's just wonderful to have the letter, to have her description, to have photographs of the Duchesses wearing it, and they all wear it in different ways. You can take the clasp off and wear it as a brooch, you can wear it as a pendant, you could put it as the centre on a bracelet if you wanted to, but many of them wear it and with a clasp at the side and with these pearls suspended. It's lovely to spot it in different photographs. But the Burlington marriage is probably the other most significant one that I can think of, and that's where the future 4th Duke of Devonshire married the daughter of the 3rd Earl of Burlington, and through them Chiswick, Lismore, lots of the books, manuscripts, furniture and statuary come into the family on that marriage. And we know that the Earl and his wife, Lady Dorothy, spent a lot of money on diamonds in the early years of their marriage, so they were obviously quite keen on jewellery themselves, and presumably that fondness passed down to their daughter Charlotte, who married into the family.
How did the Henry VIII's rosary beads get into the collection?
Well, that's the Sixth Duke again. He's one of our most prolific collectors, and he bought the rosary from Rundland Bridge because they dealt in antiquities. And the rosary was made while Henry VIII was still married to Catherine of Aragon, and we can say that with some certainty because it has both of their initials on it. So it's a boxwood rosary, 10 beads suspended from a cross, and a very large paternoster bead at the bottom which opens up. And boxwood is this very dense wood which means that you can carve it very deeply, and it holds very precise shapes. So unlike other woods where if you carve something it sort of softens, this is almost like carving stone, and it ages really well. So it seems that the rosary was in Henry VIII's possession, and then passed into the hands of some French clerics, where it remained until the Victorian period. We're not exactly certain when the Sixth Duke bought it, but we know it was at Chatsworth by 1844 and has been here ever since. And one of the lovely things about it is not only have we got the rosary, but we've got its fitted case as well, which is shaped to the rosary. So it's kind of like a trefoil with a long bit going away from it, and it's lined with green velvet inside, and the outside is this really rich, dark, tooled brown leather. So the two together are really quite spectacular, and I do wish that we had more boxes than we do have. And I suspect that when boxes go, fittings do too, because lots of pieces come off their frames and can be reused as pendants and brooches and all kinds of things. So it does tell you a lot about how people intended or perhaps did wear things.
And just to focus for a moment more about what you haven't got, you don't have any jewels from Georgiana Cavendish, do you? Who is the great style icon who was married to the 5th Duke, which most people will have seen played by Keira Knightley in the film called The Duchess.
Yes. So there's probably a number of reasons, and I must say, the thing with diamonds, as with pearls, is that once they're detached from their original object, it's really hard to tell whether you've got a diamond that's been with the family for hundreds of years or just a few years. Sometimes you can spot a cut, from one piece to another. So it is possible that there are some diamonds from Georgiana lingering around, but we can't say that with any certainty. But one of the reasons why we don't have jewels belonging to her is that she used to buy jewellery in order to pay off debts, to act as collateral on debts, because she had a problem with gambling. So this is one of the sadnesses of Georgiana's life. So she was married when she was about 17, and she had this really romantic idea of what her marriage was going to be like. She'd married the premier duke in the country, and she was going to be châtelaine of all these wonderful houses, and she had this entry into society. But the man that she married was quite gruff, quite introverted, and was quite embarrassed by her affection towards him, particularly in public. So she felt rejected, and she was so young, she didn't know how to begin to navigate this marriage. So she was a politician, she was a mineralogist, she was a traveller, she was a poet, she was a musician, but sadly she felt so alone at times in this marriage that gambling became a huge part of her life. And also because it was part of how people socialised then. It was the norm to gamble at home, to go out. It was just what you did. But she really struggled with telling the Duke just how bad the gambling debts had got. And she was trying to manage them herself, which was quite a bad idea because she just didn't have the aptitude, I suppose, to manage them. And so she came to this idea of buying jewellery in order to stand against debts. But because she was unable to manage them, there's this one really, really awful, sad letter where she's trying to lay out exactly what's happened to this particular piece. And she's come to the realisation that not only has she not paid for the jewellery that she bought, she hasn't paid off the debt, and she hasn't got the jewellery anymore either. So she's in even more of a pickle than when she actually started. So that probably is a really good reason why we don't have anything that belongs to her any longer. I would hope that some jewellery went to her sister, went to her daughters, her niece, but we haven't yet tracked down anything concrete that says that that's the case. And I rather feel that if that provenance was known, that would have come out even anecdotally, and it hasn't.
You need to trace down these card sharks at the time, because maybe they were paid off in jewels.
Well, maybe. Her son had the really unenviable job of inviting the people she owed money to come forward and to prove that they were owed money, and that he would pay the debts. And it took years to do that. But they did attempt to do it.
So you do have one of the most magnificent collections in the world of carved gemstones collected by the second Duke. Now, he really was an avid collector, wasn't he?
He was. He was from the generation who were the first to be able to resume the Grand Tour. And he had an interest in poetry and literature of the ancient world. So when he went on his Grand Tour, he collected medals, coins, and also carved gems. And we have one of the largest collections that's still in the family who originally collected it.
So he was touring Rome, Naples, and actively buying. How long was he away for on the Grand Tour?
He was away for a couple of years, but this interest continued when he got home. So we've got these wonderful letters between the Duke and an agent, Baron von Stosch, talking about von Stosch finding things for him and describing them and sending them back. And then the Duke sealing a letter with one of the gems that von Stosch had found for him. And these descriptions about how they came to be here. And it's wonderful to read the letter and then to realise that you've actually still got the gem in the collection. So we've got a good half a dozen of those. So he had Roman, Greek gems and also Renaissance ones. So the bulk of around about 500 were collected by the second Duke, but also augmented by his son, his grandson and his great-great-grandson as well.
But they're just trays and trays and trays and different colours. And it's all glyptic arts, isn't it? It's all either carved into the hard gemstone, sardonyx or some other hard gemstone, or it's carved in relief, sort of cameo style.
That's right. So they are miniature sculptures, glyptics, which means to carve, and intaglio, where the design is into the stone, and cameo, where it's relieved. And you might choose a stone where you can use the colours to create the design. So, and what that, particularly when you're illustrating a myth, Orion riding the dolphin or something like that, is you can use the different colour stones to be the fur on an animal or the scales on a fish or the hair on a person, and they are really spectacular. But as you say, there's lots of carnelians, sapphires, amethyst, emeralds, aquamarines, lots and lots of colours, and they're set as rings and pendants, but also in the pearl.
And they tell incredibly, as you say, complicated classical stories. So part of this was a sort of scholarly interest, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So the Duke would not only have understood what the story being illustrated was, but also would have shared those with people who had similar interests. So back at home, these would have been displayed in a cabinet, and we actually have the bull cabinet that he had made to keep these in, and a portrait of the Duke and the cabinet and the gems by Charles Jervis. So that's an amazing thing to have. But he would invite people with a similar interest to come to his cabinet in his closet to enjoy the gems, the impressions. They might have looked at old master drawings that illustrated the stories, and books and impressions and engravings. So there was a whole world based around these gemstones, which you could also wear and communicate your interest to others.
And then some were set into the famous Devonshire parure. Not everybody agreed with that, did they? They thought that they were taking the authority of the gems and creating something too frivolous.
Yes. So it's 1856, and the 6th Duke's niece and nephew, the Granvilles, are going to the coronation of Tsar Alexander II and acting as Queen Victoria's representatives. And the 6th Duke had already been to a Russian coronation, so he knew that any woman attending these variety of social events would need a suite of jewellery to see her through the different types of events, but also it would need to be something really quite special, because the kokoshniks and other things at the Russian court were so spectacular. Whatever a woman going there would need was something really quite different. So they hit upon this idea of taking 88 gems, cameos and intaglios from the collection and setting them into 7 different pieces of jewellery. Let's see, there was a bandeau, a coronet, a diadem, a necklace, a bracelet, a stomacher, I'm missing one, a comb.
Not to be worn at the same time.
I think you could probably manage 3. So a headpiece like a coronet or a comb, a necklace and a bracelet or something in there. But no, I think if you put them, you couldn't put them all on together. But we certainly don't think that's what she did. But you would need them for afternoon gatherings and different parties and balls and the coronation itself. And it was set in gold, which was enamelled in the Holbenesque style. And then the whole thing, as Hancock's described it, lightened with diamonds, because they set the jewellery. And there's a letter from C.F. Hancock's, who designed and made the parure, to Joseph Paxton, who was the 6th Duke's agent on these kind of projects. And he writes to Paxton that it's going to need some diamonds, else the whole will be dark and utterly spoiled. Now, if that isn't a smart marketing trick, I don't know what is. So we've got these beautiful renderings of the parure as it comes to fruition, and Countess Maria takes the suite and wears it, and it's this huge success. She comes back and she wears it to a reception at Buckingham Palace. It goes on display in London and Manchester, and it's illustrated, and people can buy the booklets where not only the jewels themselves are illustrated, but the description of the stone, the story that it illustrates, is included as well. But a later librarian and curator at Chatsworth, Eugenie Strong, she was an archaeologist, so she was interested in the stones for their archaeological interest, and she did have some concerns that somehow setting these stones, which were a fabulous interest to scholars, might somehow be making them a bit frivolous. And it is true that carved gems are terrifically difficult to see when they're set in a piece of jewellery. That's why they lend themselves to study in a cabinet. You really meant to hold them in a good light, in a range of different lights, and study them up close. Which is why they're very difficult to display for the public.
So how many tiaras are there in the collection? We've looked at quite a few, and I'll be posting those on Instagram because they are sensational. How many do you have there?
So aside from the 2 headpieces in the parure, we've got 2 diamond tiaras as well. So we have the honeysuckle tiara, which was made in 1865 for Lady Louisa Egerton, who was the daughter of the 7th Duke of Devonshire, and the palm and lotus tiara, which was made in 1897 by A.F. Skinner for Duchess Louise, the wife of the 8th Duke of Devonshire.
And the honeysuckle has quite a substantial stone in the centre.
It does. Quite a large stone. It's certainly a big diamond with a very, very beautiful colour. But it's funny, because the tiara's comparatively light, and the honeysuckle motifs are like little fans, and they sit proud at the head, and the back's open. It's a very wearable piece, and the present Duchess and her eldest daughter both chose to wear it at their weddings because it's so wearable. It's a very feminine, very light piece.
Whereas the palm and lotus is very heavy.
It's a stonker. Yeah, I always mean to weigh it, and I never get round to it. But certainly Duchess Evie, who was mistress of the robes to Queen Mary, did complain of the weight of the tiara. And I think it's really interesting to think about how head ornaments were worn, because you can see on photographs of successive duchesses wearing the tiara how they position it differently on their head, and I think this is to do partially with their hairstyles. So Duchess Louise in 1897 has this very high piled Victorian hair, and the tiara was designed to sit very straight on top of this stack of hair, so she had this wonderful cushion between the weight of the tiara and her head. Duchess Evie, sort of the same. She has this piled Edwardian hairdo, but when we get to the 1950s and Duchess Mary's wearing it, she's got a much shorter, it's not quite shingled, but it's a shorter hairstyle, and the tiara moves down, so it's sitting more on the back of her head, and I think that's partially to do with the size of it, but also the comfort of wearing it. And Duchess Louise had a real calamity when she wore the tiara. She attended the coronation of Edward VII. These are terrifically long days. You have to get up at about 4 in the morning to get into your peeress robes and make the journey to the Abbey and then sit and wait. And once you're in there, you're in there. And she had been at this coronation and was bursting to powder her nose after it was all done. So she's running from the coronation. You know, you've got to imagine, you know, she's got the robes under one arm and she's running to get to the ladies, and she slips over and the tiara comes off her head and bounces away in front of her. And one of the other peeresses had to go and fetch it and just plonk it back on her head. So, you know, it's not all glamour, this getting dressed up and wearing jewellery, is it?
Well, you have to suffer for the beauty of it, don't you? Because I guess the stomachers are pretty heavy and scratchy, and I mean, you had to have very substantial fabrics to
Yeah,
wear
and
those.
I guess, I mean, that's what they were designing for. Those wardrobes, you would have had your underlayer, your chemise close to your skin, you'd have had your, let's say, your contouring layers, and then the final layer of your gown. So the stomacher, it's a kite shape, and it's got this sort of it's almost like a crenellation with arches on the top, and then a very large suspended jewel, and in the centre of it there's a lapis intaglio which can be detached and worn as a brooch. So the back of it has this large pin, and then the whole thing is kind of suspended chains into which the stones are set. So were you to wear that close to your skin, it would be scratchy, but that's not what they had in mind when it was designed. The bracelet, however, is lovely. It's these 2 rounded curves of gold and this lovely thick thumb latch, and it just fits the wrist absolutely beautifully. Then the necklace, I should imagine, would be quite scratchy on your skin.
But I just can't impress enough to anyone listening, the trays and trays and trays. Fan holders, combs, posy rings, incredible snake, emerald, diamond snake jewels. I mean, it's such a rich collection. And of course there are lots of insect jewels. Devonshire famously used to wear the insect jewels, didn't she?
She did. So she had a fondness for insects. We've got a large suite of table ceramics that are decorated with insects that she knew as a child. And her husband, Duke Andrew, used to buy her insect jewelleries, and we've got some wonderful photographs. Her favourite way to wear them was lined up down her front, 20 or 30 at a time, or down her sleeves, and she had crickets and wasps and bees and just every manner of insect that you can imagine. So we have a couple of those left in the collection, and a few were loaned back to us for House Style, the exhibition of 2017, because she'd gifted quite a number to female relatives and close friends. So that was nice to have them back together again.
And how important is this collection of jewellery in telling the story of the house, in your opinion?
I think it's vital, really, because jewellery is such a personal thing. If you don't know anything else about it, you can talk about the craftsmanship and the type of stones and the period when it's likely to have come into the family. But when you do know something about it, it can illustrate so much about a person's taste and aspirations. We've got a wonderful jewel that was bought by Duchess Deborah from the sale of Cornelia Countess Craven, and it's this amazing heart-shaped sapphire brooch surrounded by diamonds with this wonderful pear-shaped pink diamond, and that was bought for pure pleasure and enjoyment. And that's a real revelation, as to what somebody would choose to buy if they could. And it's just this wonderful, joyful piece. Other things are from archaeological excavations, and they've come into the collection in quite a scholarly way. But to see them being worn by the present generation, it adds something to all those past nuances. They're constantly being added to and enjoyed, and I think that's one of the main pleasures of curating a family collection. It's not static at all, it keeps growing and changing.
And that's why the present Duchess adds to it, doesn't she, with Andrew Greener particularly.
Greener's definitely one of her favourites. She commissioned a pair of earrings from Jojo Greener to go with the Duchess necklace. So the Duchess certainly has been fond of Greener since the 1960s. I think she won a brooch in a raffle, and that just opened her eyes up to this whole world of really contemporary jewellery. You know, she was a very young woman, and that gave her an outlet to buy things that were for her generation. So it's great for the present Duchess to be able to choose from these really historical pieces. And I'm sure there must be some comfort there in knowing that you're wearing something that previous Duchesses have worn. It must bolster your confidence hugely. But the flip side is that she also can buy and wear things that express her personality.
Well, of course, Andrew Gremer was the great modernist, English modernist, who really changed jewellery. There was this seminal exhibition at the Goldsmiths Company in about 1961 when it really came to light. And in a way, it's sort of very relevant to have it in your collection when you think of Georgiana Cavendish's interest in mineralogy, because Andrew Gremer was less about precious stones, but interesting stones. And sometimes it was a fossil or fluorite or something very unusual, just chosen for its colour rather than its preciousness.
Absolutely. There's lots of parallels that you can draw between things that are new to the collection and things that have been here a long time. And that's a really lovely facet of what we do. The Duke has this favourite phrase, which is everything was new once. And I think that's quite a nice way to look back at what we have in the collection. It was, the height of sophistication. It might have been challenging. It was the contemporary art of its time. Whoever bought it, their parents probably hated it. But what has survived, it's created these layers of juxtaposition and if you like, conversations across the different generations of objects. And one thing that we probably shouldn't forget is it's not just Chatsworth. There've been around 19 different houses that have been associated with the Cavendishes over the last 500 years. And many of the things that were at all of those different properties have been funneled down into Chatsworth. So we're able to create juxtapositions and relationships that probably in their time never would have been, but because of fate, we're now able to do so.
And talking about keeping this living collection alive and adding contemporary pieces, we're joined here today by Tarka Kings, the artist who's been commissioned by the family for the exhibition starting on March the 26th called Living with Art We Love. And so, Tarka, I'm very interested because you've actually created things for the family before, but more of your artworks, haven't you? And this one will involve jewellery.
Hi, Carol. Yes, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. In the past, I've made paintings and drawings for them, which obviously hang on their walls, and I've made a series of wall drawings there, which was very exciting. But this is the very first, in fact, it was the first time I'd ever made jewellery of any kind.
How was that challenge for you?
It was very exciting. I always find moving medium to be, you learn something new, and I'd always been very interested in artist jewellery and had wanted to make something, so it was quite apposite that this happened.
And they particularly wanted jewellery. Was that important to them, that it was a jewel?
So it began by them wanting a miniature that to add to their collection of miniatures, and then it sort of turned into a few pieces of jewellery that were all relating to, because it was meant to relate to their collection, what they've been collecting. It turned into lots of comments on work that they've, both inside and outside Chatsworth, that they've commissioned.
From other artists?
From different artists, garden designers, and the redecoration of Chatsworth that they did.
So that's so many avenues you can go down. How did you distill a particular idea out of all of that?
There were so many that you could go on and on and on, keep making things for years if you wanted. But I would talk to Amanda, the present Duchess, about which aspects of their collection they were interested in. The redecoration of the interior of Chatsworth and alteration was done by Peter Inskip, the architect, and Dave Milinarik, the designer. And so it seemed important to reflect both those people and the work that they did on the house. Hence there were two pieces of jewellery, one which is a golden window, as they I think in the past they had been gilded, but they re-gilded them. So they were remaking a lot of the old sort of tassels all around the beds and things. So I made a pair of earrings that are two of the tassels.
So which room is the first box?
It's called the centre room, and it's a very beautiful, very spare room that seemed to be very like the architect and the designer and the Duke and Duchess. And it has hardly anything in it but a piano, beautiful Sean Scully, and that, just the room in itself, I would often think was one of the most beautiful rooms in the house.
So you've recreated that in miniature.
So it's a scaled model of that room.
And then you hang how many pieces of jewellery in that room?
In that room are 5 pieces of jewellery. And then they also commissioned recently, you were talking about plates earlier, Michael Craig Martin to make them a set of plates. So there's another little pendant which is sort of implying one of Craig Martin's plates. Mm-hmm. And that's another little pendant that we've propped up on a table in this room, as if it was a very large plate.
And so they'll be in the room unless somebody wants to wear them, and then they can remove them from the room and wear it.
Exactly, and then they can remove them from the room and wear them. Some easier to remove than others.
Which are the not easy? What are they?
Well, there's a bracelet that I designed, which is to do with this series of wall drawings that I made, and that's sort of tied on little bits of transparent plastic string from the roof of the room, so that would be harder to take off.
So it's a fantastical jewelled doll's house.
It is really, yes, which came about sort of by mistake in the way that all good things do.
Well, and a conversation that evolves.
And a conversation that evolves.
So is it incredibly important that anyone commissioning artwork has a close relationship with the artist?
I think it's very helpful because you build up an understanding and a trust that therefore makes everything much more easy, and sort of it flows much better if that's the case. They're very, very good at commissioning artworks in that they stand back in a very impressive way, but they're also involved.
Because I guess you have to trust the artist's ideas.
You do, and particularly if you're commissioning something, which is different from going and seeing something you like and buying it, because you can't really control what you're going to get.
Yes, there's a risk.
So there's a risk in it, yes. And I think they're very understanding of that situation, which is quite unusual in people who are collectors.
So Sash, are you very pleased to have some contemporary works coming into the collection?
Oh, I'm thrilled. Tarka's work was originally commissioned for an exhibition we created called Life Stories, but it couldn't fit better with this year's exhibition, which is all about the Duke and Duchess's collecting. And what could be a better illustration of all of the things that you might associate with them? You haven't touched on the outdoor box really, Tarka, but that's in this fabulous nighttime scene, if you want to describe it.
Yes, it's a smaller box, and it's as if you were in the Paxton Rockery, which they've kind of adapted. What would you say, Sash, about that?
They have. So they've taken the Paxton Rockery, which, if you haven't seen it, it's this amazing, almost lunar landscape of these enormous blocks of stone, and some of them are piled on top of each other to create a waterfall. And they've actually incorporated that into part of a new garden. So rather than lock, stock, changing something, they've worked with the character and brought their own planting and aspirations into it. And that's really what your box reflects, isn't it? The meshing of those two things.
Yeah, so the box reflects the stones, and then the necklace that hangs, the main thing that hangs in that is a necklace, which is, again, about the rockery and the sort of water that falls down the centre of that rockery. So it was it seemed that what they do outdoors was as important to them as what they do indoors, and therefore you needed both.
And where will these be displayed? They're going to be in the exhibition. They're not going to be locked up in the gold vault, are they, after that?
Not for this year, at least. So they're in a glass vitrine on the visitor route, in a corridor, which one side of which is entirely populated by a ceramic work by Jacob van der Beugel. And it's called informally the DNA wall, because in the ceramic tiles, it reflects the DNA of the Duke and Duchess, their son, Lord Burlington, and his wife, Lady Burlington. And then in the centre, there's a panel of DNA, which is the common DNA that we all humans have. So it's this juxtaposition of the particular and the general. Yeah, the Duke and Duchess's boxes will be on display this year, and I'm sure that they will be living with them in the near future.
That's so exciting. And in the way that we learnt about the second Duke from his carved gemstone collection, what do you want in 100, 500 years when people look at your boxes, Tarka? What do you want them to understand about the Devonshires?
I think they're both very playful and very serious about their collecting and the way that they live their life, and that's something that you notice when you're around them. And I think that the current Duchess, to go back to the jewellery in particular, she wears jewellery in a very natural way, wouldn't you? So she'll wear quite unusual things just in her daily life, so she's completely she's not just putting something on to go to a very grand evening. It's part of her every day, and I think that's...
Pieces from the collection, anything she feels like, is it that? Will she come down, Sash, and rifle through the gold safe and say, I want that today?
And I would love it if she did. There's a beautiful pair of pendant diamond earrings that the Duchess has worn on occasion, and when they were included in the house style exhibition, we had a little card that when the Duchess wanted to wear them, we could put on display and say the Duchess is wearing them tonight, and that was lovely. As I said, the Duchess and her daughter, Lady Selina, both wore one of the tiaras to their wedding, so it'd be thrilling if that happened again, or even to a coronation. And in 2017, Lady Burlington did a shoot for Vogue where she wore pieces from the Perrault, some of Duchess Deborah's insect brooches, and some of the ancient gold rings all together, and that was just phenomenal. To see them worn like that in this totally fashion context. So yeah, I'd be thrilled if that continued.
So they'll be on display. And what intrigued you about making jewellery, Tarka? Why did you say that you'd always wanted to make jewellery?
Because, I particularly looked at artist jewellery, which in a way is coming at it from a different angle, and more like what you were saying about Andrew Gremer, in that it's the colours that are interesting or something. And I was very ignorant about how jewellery is made. So at the beginning, there's quite a lot of, I'd like this, and then they'd say, oh no, you can't do that, it's not possible. Or I think the fact that jewellery is worn by people is very interesting to an artist, in that it becomes very, very personal in a way that pictures on a wall or sculptures or videos aren't. And they seem to sort of hold a lot of emotion for people in a very strange way, and always have. And so I think that was part of why it was interesting. And just because to cross boundaries and cross areas is always invigorating for the other work that you do. So it sort of bounces you back and forth with different things.
So will you find returning to pencil drawing and cut paper a light relief after this?
Well, it's always good to go back, have a change again. Exactly, yes, in a way. Because of course it's all... Everything is very complicated, and to understand and find out how jewellery works and is made is extraordinary too, and all the incredible craftsmanship that can go into things.
And will you continue? Do you think you'll make more jewellery?
I will. I have made some more since that for Louise Guinness, and hopefully I will carry on.
Because we did a If Jewels Could Talk episode with Louisa on artist jewellery.
Fascinating.
So anyone interested by this can go back and listen to that and hear what you're talking about, artist jewels in more depth. But I think, Sash, what I get from you is that it makes such a difference that all these things are in a home and the family live in the home.
Absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with static or closed collections, but having a collection that is lived with is completely different, and it's something that I particularly enjoy. And to be able to ask questions now, one of the frustrations of what I do is that the things that aren't recorded from the past, so I'm always asking questions now so that I can pass on to my successors the why of a lot of things, because that's when you can root out, why these stones, why these designs, why now, and that's just lovely. And I am really hopeful that we'll see tiaras and other things going out and being photographed and lived in the future.
And what an honour that your jewellery is part of that, Tarka.
It's so nice, and it's so exciting to be able to see, like, as you were saying, the Duke said, everything was new once, because you become aware of that at Chatsworth, and I can't think of anywhere in England that has got a living collection in quite the same way. So you don't come across it very often. So yeah, I'm thrilled.
Tarka, thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for taking the time.
And thank you for talking to us both.
The exhibition Living with Art We Love is on now and will run until the 9th of October. Sash, thank you so much for hosting us.
No, thank you, it's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We've come to the end of the season. We will be back in June. In the meantime, please get hold of us on the website, carolwoolton.com/podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, we've got a terrific season lined up. We are going to start with royal jewels. We have access to London and Windsor to discuss the jewels of Her Majesty the Queen over the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. We are going to go on and talk about great women who've worn jewellery and great women who've made jewellery. As ever, it'll be a range of the past and the future and the significance of jewellery in all the cultural aspects of our lives. So please join us in June for the next season. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. If Jewels Could Talk with Carol Woolton is produced by Natasha Cowan, music and editing by Tim Thornton, graphics by Scott Bentley, illustration by Jordi Labanda, and you can find me on Instagram at Carol Woolton.